The blizzard struck Eliza Thornton's cabin on the third night of January 1874. By dawn, the cold had turned deadly, sinking far below zero, the kind of cold that punished every mistake. Wind screamed through the cracks in the logs, rattling the thin door and shaking the walls like a warning. Inside the small cabin west of Helena, Montana territory, Eliza knelt beside her youngest son. 7-year-old Tommy burned with fever, his breath shallow, his skin hot while the air around them felt sharp enough to cut. Eliza did not step outside to reach firewood. She did not wrap herself in coats or leave her sick child alone. Instead, she opened a door that led not into the storm, but into a covered space that wrapped around her cabin like a wide wooden collar. From a neat stack just an arm's reach away, she pulled out 3 split logs. They were bone dry. She fed the stove, closed the door, and stayed beside her son as the fire roared back to life. 6 months earlier, neighbors had laughed at that structure. They called it foolish. They called it ugly. They said it would never work. Now, while other families fought snow and wind just to reach buried wood piles, Eliza stayed warm. Her fire never went out. Her child lived through the night. Eliza Thornton had arrived in Montana territory the previous spring with 3 children, $47, and a land claim that no longer belonged to a living man. Her husband had filed the claim 2 weeks before a mining accident crushed his chest and left her a widow at 31. The cabin sat in a narrow valley where Prickly Pear Creek cut through pine-covered hills. Families nearby had survived winters here. They watched newcomers closely, knowing most did not last. Her cabin measured 16 by 20 feet. The dirt floor stayed damp after rain. The roof leaked in 4 places. Wind slipped through the chinking like a thief. The nearest neighbor lived nearly a mile away. The closest town was 7 miles east, along a road that often vanished under mud or snow. Eliza knew there would be no help once winter closed in. Her first weeks were spent repairing what she could. She patched the roof with split shakes and stuffed moss and clay into every gap between the logs. Her children worked beside her. Tommy and 9-year-old Sarah gathered stones for a better hearth. 4-year-old Benjamin carried what he could and stayed close. At night, Eliza studied the small woodpile left by the man who had abandoned the claim before her. It was not nearly enough. That man had lost 2 fingers to frostbite and walked away. Eliza did not have that option. By late May, an old trapper named Higgins stopped by. He had lived through more than 24 Montana winters and spoke with the confidence of survival. He studied her cabin, spat tobacco into the dirt, and shook his head. "You'll need 8 cords of firewood," he told her. "Pine burns fast. 1 cord every 3 weeks once the cold sets in, and cold here starts early." Eliza did the math in her head as he spoke. 8 cords meant hundreds of heavy logs. It meant weeks of cutting, splitting, and stacking. It meant work that usually took strong men working together. She was alone, with 3 children and a garden to plant. Higgins said what everyone else was thinking. A woman alone could not do all of it. Not in time. Eliza had grown up in Ohio, where her father ran a sawmill. She knew wood. She knew moisture ruined heat. She knew wasted effort could kill you just as surely as cold. That night, she lay awake listening to the creek and thinking about winter. The idea came in early June during a sudden rain. She had been splitting rounds near the cabin when the sky opened without warning. She rushed to cover the woodpile with canvas, but it was too late. Water soaked into the fresh splits. Wet wood smoked and burned poorly. Poor heat meant more fuel used. More fuel meant more work. She dragged the pile under the roof edge on the south side of the cabin. The eave only covered a small space, but the wood beneath it stayed dry. Eliza stood back and looked at the cabin itself. The answer was right in front of her. What if the woodshed was not separate? What if it surrounded the cabin instead? She imagined extending the roof outward on all sides. A wide covered space where firewood could be stacked off the ground. Air could move freely. Rain and snow would never touch it. The wood would stay dry, and she could reach it without stepping into a storm. It would look strange. Everyone would notice. But it would work. Eliza sketched the idea on a piece of bark using charcoal. She counted posts, beams, and shakes. She would need time and strength more than money. The forest provided dead pine. Her father had taught her how to work it. The risk was clear. If she was wrong, winter would punish her for it. She spoke of the idea once in town. The reaction was not kind. The preacher warned her about fire danger. A storekeeper told her she was wasting time. A widow who owned the trading post said new ideas ruined people faster than bad luck. Eliza listened and said little. Words would not save her children. Proof would. She began in early July. She set posts 6 feet from the cabin walls, sinking them deep into the earth and packing them with stone. The work was slow. Benjamin napped while she dug. Sarah and Tommy helped when they could. Eliza lifted the heavy posts herself, checking each one carefully. By mid-July, the post stood like a fence around the cabin. People riding past slowed their horses to stare. Some laughed openly. Eliza kept working. A neighbor named Silas Garrett stopped by with venison one afternoon. He said little, but his eyes stayed on the posts. He had lost his wife to sickness and knew how quickly things could fall apart. He did not laugh. He only asked if she thought she could finish in time. "I have to," Eliza said. August brought long days and aching muscles. Eliza cut rafters from dead pine and fit them carefully from the old roof out to the new posts. Each piece took time. Each mistake cost effort she could not afford. She worked until dark most nights. Her hands blistered. Her back burned. Still, the roof grew. By the end of August, the structure stood complete. A wide roof now wrapped around the cabin, creating a covered corridor on all sides. Eliza had less than a cord of wood stacked beneath it. Winter was coming fast. A doctor from Helena rode out in early September and shook his head when he saw the structure. He told her she would fail. He told her pride killed settlers. Eliza listened and then explained her thinking. Dry wood burned hotter. Elevated stacks dried faster. Covered wood stayed usable. She needed less volume if every piece worked at full strength. The doctor did not argue after he lifted a dry split from under the roof and felt how light it was. September turned cold at night. Eliza cut wood with desperation. She stacked it under the roof, leaving space for air. Pieces she cut weeks earlier already burned clean. The system was working, but time was against her. Snow fell for the first time in October. Eliza had less than half of what she needed. She rationed heat and wrapped the children in blankets. Silas returned with extra wood and said it was nothing. Eliza accepted because survival mattered more than pride. By November, the cabin stayed warmer than it ever had before. Feeding the stove was easy. No coats. No snow tracked inside. The fire stayed steady. Eliza slept in short stretches, listening to the wind and counting her remaining wood. Then January came, and with it, the storm that tested everything. As the blizzard howled outside, Eliza stayed inside with her sick child, feeding the stove from dry stacks just steps away. The shed that surrounded her home did what it was built to do. While others risked their lives in the dark and cold, Eliza stayed warm, alert, and alive. And by morning, when the storm showed no sign of mercy, the laughter in the valley was already turning into silence. The blizzard did not weaken after that first night. It pressed harder, like something alive testing the strength of Eliza's walls. Snow slammed against the roof and slid away in heavy sheets. Wind poured through the valley, screaming down from the hills and piling drifts higher than the cabin windows. The world outside vanished into white. Inside, the stove glowed red, and the cabin stayed warm enough for breath to come easy. Eliza did not sleep much. She sat near Tommy, changing cloths on his forehead, listening to his chest rise and fall. Each time the fire softened, she stood, opened the inner door, and reached for wood. The stack stood clean and dry, just where she had placed them months earlier. She fed the stove and returned to her son without ever stepping into the storm. By the second day, the cold grew sharper. The temperature dropped so low that metal burned skin. Oil thickened. Water froze faster than it could be poured. In cabins across the valley, fires struggled. Families who had stored wood in open piles found them buried under heavy snow. Some tried to dig, Some tried to break ice from frozen logs. Others waited too long. Eliza burned more wood than usual, but she never hesitated. The system she had built removed hesitation. Every piece was ready. Every step was safe. Tommy's fever peaked that afternoon. He moaned and twisted under the blankets, his breath wet and uneven. Eliza feared the sound more than the storm. She kept the cabin warm, warmer than she ever had before. She did not worry about wasting fuel. Heat was the medicine she had. The storm lasted 4 days. When the wind finally eased, the valley lay buried and silent. Snow reached the lower edge of Eliza's extended roof, but the corridor beneath remained clear. The open sides had allowed wind to pass through instead of piling snow inside. The wood stack stood untouched. Eliza stepped outside for the first time and saw what winter had done. Fences disappeared. Barns leaned under heavy loads. Smoke rose thin and weak from some cabins. From others, none at all. Silas Garrett arrived on snowshoes 2 days later. His face was red with cold, his beard crusted with ice. He stood in the corridor and stared at the wood stacks. "You didn't lose a single piece," he said quietly. Eliza shook her head. "Not one." Silas removed his hat. He did not smile. Jacob Morrison froze to death in his barn, tried to reach feed, got turned around. Eliza closed her eyes. Jacob had lived here longer than most. He had done things the way they had always been done. That news traveled fast. So did another. Eliza Thornton's cabin had stayed warm through the storm. Her child had survived sickness when others did not. Old Higgins came next, moving slow but steady on snowshoes. He walked the length of the structure, studying every post and beam. He did not spit. He did not shake his head. "How much wood did you burn?" he asked. Eliza told him the truth. "More than usual, but within reach, always within reach." Higgins nodded once. "Access," he said. "That's what kills people. Not the cold, the distance." He did not apologize. He did not need to. His silence was enough. As winter dragged on, the value of Eliza's design became clearer. The cabin temperature stayed steady. The children stayed healthier. Eliza conserved strength she would have wasted fighting storms. She slept more. She worked less to achieve more. Neighbors began to stop by, not to laugh, but to measure. They counted steps, checked roof angles, felt the dryness of the wood. Some asked questions. Others simply watched and went home thinking. By late February, 3 families had nearly run out of usable firewood. Their piles had frozen together or soaked and refrozen. They burned furniture. They burned fence rails. One family left entirely, packing what they could and heading east in bitter cold. Eliza still had wood. The shed that surrounded her home had become part of the valley's talk. People no longer called it foolish. They called it clever. They called it safe. When spring finally came, it came slow and wet. Snow melted into mud. Roads vanished. Eliza watched the creek swell and thought about the year ahead. She had survived her first winter. More than that, she had learned. Silas returned often that spring. Sometimes he brought supplies. Sometimes he brought nothing but conversation. He asked about her plans. He listened when she spoke. He respected the structure she had built and the thinking behind it. Other families copied parts of her design that summer. Some extended only one side of their roofs. Others built covered paths between cabin and shed. Each version helped. Each version proved the idea worked. Eliza did not charge, but she did not claim ownership. She explained what mattered. Keep wood dry, keep it close. Let air move. Build for storms, not for looks. By the time the next winter approached, laughter had disappeared entirely. What remained was quiet respect and careful imitation. Bob hauled, contained in a pedantic phrase of gossip, and when the first snow fell again, Eliza stood in her covered corridor, ran her hand along the dry stacks, and knew she had changed something important. Not just for herself, but for everyone who learned to watch what worked instead of clinging to what always had. The valley would never look at winter the same way again. The second winter tested the valley again, But it was a different kind of test. It was not about survival this time. It was about proof. By the time snow returned, Eliza Thornton had more firewood than she had ever owned. 7 full cords stood stacked beneath the wide roof that surrounded her cabin. Every piece was dry, light, and ready. She had cut steadily through summer and fall without panic, without rushing, because the system worked. The wood dried faster. None of it rotted. None of it vanished under snow. Other cabins in the valley looked different now. Roofs had grown wider. Posts stood where none had before. Covered walkways connected doors to wood stacks. The valley no longer laughed at strange buildings. It copied them. That winter was milder than the last, but cold still came hard at times. Fires burned steady across the valley. People moved less in storms. Fewer lanterns flickered outside at night. Fewer risks were taken. No one froze trying to reach wood. Eliza noticed the change quietly. She did not speak of it. She lived inside it. Tommy grew stronger. His cough faded. Sarah learned to manage the stove herself. Benjamin stacked kindling with pride. The cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a home. Eliza's body healed from the constant strain of fear. She slept through nights without listening for disaster. Silas Garrett proposed in the spring. He did not speak of romance. He spoke of partnership, of shared work, of raising children in hard land without standing alone against it. Eliza took time to think. She weighed the same things she always had: safety, stability, respect. She said yes. They joined households that summer. Silas built his own version of the roofed wood structure, following Eliza's measurements closely. He never claimed it as his idea. He told anyone who asked where it came from. Old Higgins passed 2 winters later. His fire went out during a deep cold snap while he slept. No one judged him. The valley understood now how thin the line was between experience and failure. His death hardened the lesson. By then, nearly every homestead nearby had adopted some form of covered wood storage. It became normal. Children grew up thinking cabins had always been built that way. No one remembered the laughter. Eliza lived in that valley the rest of her life. She raised her children there. She buried some neighbors and welcomed new ones. She never wrote about what she had done. She never asked for credit. The structure stayed because it worked. When she died many years later, her name was remembered for kindness and steadiness. The shed around her cabin was not mentioned. It did not need to be. It had become invisible through success. But on the coldest nights, when wind screamed through the hills and fires burned steady across the valley, her thinking was still there, holding warmth close, keeping danger at a distance. The neighbors had laughed once. Then winter taught them what mattered.